You are listening to the Wikipedia page for the prelude of the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, Ukraine and Russia maintained close ties. In 1994, Ukraine agreed to accede to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and become a non-nuclear weapon state. Former Soviet nuclear weapons in Ukraine were removed to Russia and dismantled. In return, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States agreed to uphold the territorial integrity and political independence of Ukraine through the Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances. In 1999, Russia was one of the signatories of the Charter for European Security, which reaffirmed the inherent right of each and every participating state to be free to choose or change its security arrangements, including treaties of alliance, as they evolve. In the years after the Soviet Union's collapse, several former Eastern Bloc countries joined NATO, partly in response to regional security threats involving Russia, such as the 1993 Russian constitutional crisis, the war in Abkhazia and the First Chechen War. Russian leaders described this expansion as a violation of Western powers' informal assurances that NATO would not expand eastward. The 2004 Ukrainian presidential election was controversial. During the election campaign, opposition candidate Viktor Yushchenko was poisoned by TCDD dioxin. He later implicated Russian involvement. In November, Prime Minister Viktor Yanukovych was declared the winner, despite allegations of vote rigging by election observers. During a 2-month period which became known as the Orange Revolution, large peaceful protests successfully challenged the outcome. After the Supreme Court of Ukraine annulled the initial result due to widespread electoral fraud, a second-round rerun was held, bringing to power Yushchenko as president and Yulia Tymoshenko as prime minister and leaving Yanukovych in opposition. The Orange Revolution is often grouped together with other early 21st century protest movements, particularly within the post-Soviet states, known as color revolutions. According to Anthony Kordesman, Russian military officers viewed such color revolutions as an attempt by the US and European states to destabilize neighboring countries and undermine Russia's national security. Russian President Vladimir Putin accused organizers of the 2011-2013 Russian protests of being former advisors to Yushchenko and described the protests as an attempt to transfer the Orange Revolution to Russia. Rallies in favor of Putin during this period were called anti-Orange protests. At the 2008 Bucharest summit, Ukraine and Georgia sought to join NATO. The response among NATO members was divided. Western European countries opposed offering membership action plans to avoid antagonizing Russia, while US President George W. Bush pushed for their admission. NATO ultimately refused to offer Ukraine and Georgia maps, but also issued a statement agreeing that these countries will become members of NATO. Putin voiced strong opposition to Georgia and Ukraine's NATO membership bids. On 7 February 2019, the Verkhovna Rada, Ukraine's parliament, voted to amend the constitution to state that the country's long-term ambition was to join the European Union and NATO. 79 However, in the months prior to the 2022 invasion, the possibility of Ukraine joining NATO remained remote. In 2009, Yanukovych announced his intent to again run for president in the 2010 Ukrainian presidential election, which he subsequently won. In November 2013, a wave of large pro-EU protests erupted in response to Yanukovych's sudden decision not to sign the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement, instead choosing closer ties to Russia and the Eurasian Economic Union. The Verkhovna Rada had overwhelmingly supported the agreement with the EU. Russia had put pressure on Ukraine to reject it. The scope of the protests widened, with protesters opposing widespread government corruption, police brutality, and repressive anti-protest laws. In February 2014, clashes in Kyiv between protesters and Berkut Special Police resulted in the deaths of 100 protesters and 13 policemen. Most of the victims were shot by police snipers. On 21 February 2014, Yanukovych and parliamentary opposition leaders signed an agreement calling for an interim government and early elections. The following day, Yanukovych fled Kyiv and later Ukraine. The Ukrainian parliament subsequently voted to remove him from office. Leaders in Russian-speaking eastern Ukraine declared continuing loyalty to Yanukovych, leading to pro-Russian unrest. Russian state-controlled media portrayed the crisis as having been instigated by the post-Yanukovych Ukrainian government and represented Euromaidan as being controlled by ultranationalist, fascist, neo-Nazi, and anti-Semitic groups. The unrest was followed by the annexation of Crimea by Russia in March 2014 and the war in Donbas, which started in April 2014 with the formation of two Russia-backed separatist quasi-states. The Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic. Russian troops were involved in the conflict. The Minsk agreements were signed in September 2014 and February 2015 in a bid to stop the fighting, although ceasefires repeatedly failed. A dispute emerged over the role of Russia. Normandy format members France, Germany, and Ukraine understood Minsk as an agreement between Russia and Ukraine, whereas Russia insisted its role was that of a neutral mediator, pressing Ukraine to negotiate directly with representatives of the two separatist republics. In 2021, Putin refused offers from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for high-level talks, and the Russian government subsequently endorsed an article by former President Dmitry Medvedev, arguing it was pointless to deal with Ukraine while it remained a vassal of the US. The annexation of Crimea led to a new wave of Russian nationalism, with large parts of the Russian neo-imperial movement aspiring to annex more land from Ukraine, including the unrecognized Novorossiya. Analyst Vladimir Sokar argued that Putin's 2014 speech after the annexation of Crimea was a de facto manifesto of Greater Russia irredentism. In July 2021, Putin published an essay titled On the Historical Unity of Russians and Ukrainians, in which he reaffirmed his view that Russians and Ukrainians were one people. American historian Timothy D. Snyder described Putin's ideas as imperialism, while British journalist Edward Lucas called it historical revisionism. 110 other observers regarded the Russian leadership as having a distorted view of modern Ukraine and its history. Ukraine and other European countries neighboring Russia accused Putin of irredentism and of pursuing aggressive militaristic policies. From March to April 2021, Russia commenced a major military build-up near the Russo-Ukrainian border. It was followed by a second build-up between October 2021 to February 2022 in both Russia and Belarus. During these developments, the Russian government repeatedly denied it had plans to invade or attack Ukraine. Those who issued the denials included government spokesman Dmitry Peskov on 28 November 2021, Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov on 19 January 2022, Russian ambassador to the US Anatoly Antonov on 20 February 2022, and Russian ambassador to the Czech Republic Alexander Zmivsky on 23 February 2022. Putin's chief national security advisor, Nikolai Patrushev, who believed that the West has been in an undeclared war with Russia for years, was a leading figure behind Russia's updated national security strategy, published in May 2021. It stated that Russia may use forceful methods to thwart or avert unfriendly actions that threaten the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Russian Federation. In early December 2021, following Russian denials, the US released intelligence of Russian invasion plans, including satellite photographs showing Russian troops and equipment near the Russo-Ukrainian border. The intelligence reported the existence of a Russian list of key sites and individuals to be killed or neutralized upon invasion. The US continued to release reports that accurately predicted the invasion plans. In the months preceding the invasion, Russian officials accused Ukraine of inciting tensions, Russophobia, and the repression of Russian speakers in Ukraine. They also made multiple security demands of Ukraine, NATO, and non-NATO allies in the EU. These actions were described by commentators and Western officials as attempts to justify war. On 9 December 2021, Putin said that Russophobia is a first step towards genocide. Putin's claims were dismissed by the international community, and Russian claims of genocide were widely rejected as baseless. Ukrainian President Zelensky declared that 16 February, a speculated date for the invasion, would be a day of unity. Ukrainians were encouraged to hang our national flags, put on blue and yellow ribbons, and show our unity to the whole world, as well as to sing the national anthem in public spaces at 10 o'clock each. In a 21 February speech, Putin questioned the legitimacy of the Ukrainian state, repeating an inaccurate claim that Ukraine never had a tradition of genuine statehood. He incorrectly described the country as having been created by Soviet Russia. To justify an invasion, Putin falsely accused Ukrainian society and government of being dominated by neo-Nazism, invoking the history of collaboration in German-occupied Ukraine during World War II, and echoing an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory which casts Russian Christians, rather than Jews, as the true victims of Nazi Germany. While Ukraine has a far-right fringe, including the neo-Nazi Azov battalion and right sector, experts have described Putin's rhetoric as greatly exaggerating the influence of far-right groups within Ukraine. There is no widespread support for the ideology in the government, military, or electorate. Ukrainian President Zelensky, who is Jewish, rebuked Putin's allegations, stating that his grandfather had served in the Soviet army fighting against the Nazis. The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum and Yad Vashem condemned the abuse of Holocaust history and the use of comparisons with Nazi ideology for propagandist purposes. During the second build-up, Russia issued demands to the US and NATO, including a legally binding arrangement preventing Ukraine from ever joining NATO and the removal of multinational forces stationed in NATO's Eastern European member states. Russia threatened an unspecified military response if NATO continued to follow an aggressive line. These demands were widely interpreted as being non-viable. New NATO members in Central and Eastern Europe had joined the alliance because their populations broadly preferred to move towards the safety and economic opportunities offered by NATO and the EU, and their government sought protection from Russian irredentism. The demand for a formal treaty preventing Ukraine from joining NATO was also seen as unviable by Western officials, as it would contravene the treaty's open-door policy, although NATO showed no desire to accede to Ukraine's requests to join. Fighting in Donbas escalated after 17 February 2022. The Ukrainians and the Russian separatists accused one another of firing into their respective territories. On 18 February, the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics ordered all civilians to leave their capitals, although observers noted that full evacuations would take months. Ukrainian media reported a sharp increase in artillery shelling by the Russian-led militants in Donbas as attempts to provoke the Ukrainian army. 157-158 In the days leading up to the invasion, the Russian government intensified a disinformation campaign intended to mute public criticism. Russian state media promoted fabricated videos, many amateur in quality, that purported to show Ukrainian forces attacking Russians in Donbas. Evidence showed that the claimed attacks, explosions, and evacuations were staged by Russia. On 21 February, the head of the Russian Federal Security Service, FSB, said that Russian forces had killed 5 Ukrainian saboteurs that crossed into Russian territory, capturing 1 Ukrainian serviceman and destroying 2 armored vehicles. The claim was denied by Ukraine and drew warnings that Russia was seeking further justification to start an invasion. The Times described it as the first move in Putin's war plan. On 21 February, Putin announced that the Russian government would recognize the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. The same evening, Putin directed that Russian troops be deployed into Donbas in what Russia referred to as a peacekeeping mission. The 21 February intervention in Donbas was condemned by several members of the UN Security Council, none voiced support. On 22 February, video footages shot in the early morning showed Russian armed forces and tanks moving in the Donbas region. The Federation Council unanimously authorized the use of military force outside Russia. In response, Zelensky ordered the conscription of Army Reservists 170. The following day, Ukraine's parliament proclaimed a 30-day nationwide state of emergency and ordered the mobilization of all reservists. 171, 172, 173 Russia began to evacuate its embassy in Kyiv. The websites of the Ukrainian parliament and government, along with banking websites, were hit by those attacks, widely attributed to Russian-backed hackers. On the night of 23 February, Zelensky gave a speech in Russian in which he appealed to the citizens of Russia to prevent war. He also refuted Russia's claims about the presence of neo-Nazis in the Ukrainian government and said that he had no intention of attacking the Donbas region. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said on 23 February that the separatist leaders in Donetsk and Luhansk had sent a letter to Putin stating that Ukrainian shelling had caused civilian deaths and appealing for military support from Russia. In response, Ukraine requested an urgent UN Security Council meeting. Half an hour into the emergency meeting, Putin announced the start of military operations in Ukraine. Sergei Kizlytsya, the Ukrainian representative, subsequently called on the Russian representative, Vasily Nebenzia, to do everything possible to stop the war or relinquish his position as president of the UN Security Council. Nebenzia refused. On 24 February, Putin announced that he had made the decision to launch a special military operation in eastern Ukraine. In his pre-invasion speech, Putin said there were no plans to occupy Ukrainian territory and that he supported the right of the peoples of Ukraine to self-determination. He said the purpose of the operation was to protect the people in the predominantly Russian-speaking region of Donbas, who, according to him, for 8 years now, had been facing humiliation and genocide perpetrated by the Kyiv regime. 190 Putin said that Russia sought the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. Within minutes of Putin's announcement, explosions were reported in Kyiv, Kharkiv, Odessa, and the Donbas region. An alleged leaked report from within the FSB claimed that the intelligence agency was not warned about Putin's plan to invade Ukraine. Immediately following the attack, Zelensky announced the introduction of martial law in Ukraine. The same evening, he ordered a general mobilization of all Ukrainian males between 18 and 60 years old who were prohibited from leaving the country. Russian troops entered Ukraine from the north in Belarus, towards Kyiv, from the northeast in Russia, towards Kharkiv, from the east in the DPR and the Luhansk People's Republic, and from the south in Crimea. Russian equipment and vehicles were marked with a white Z military symbol, a non-Cyrillic letter, believed to be a measure to prevent friendly fire.